Good evening. My name is Molefi Kete Asante. I'm very happy to be with you. And as many of you know, I have been giving a series of lectures on different topics from around the world. Tonight, my talk is actually a conversation about the African Union. Some of you know that the African Union represents the 55 nations of Africa, and it is usually led by the heads of state. The African Union was declared around 1999 in Sirte, Libya. It was then formally inaugurated in 2002 in Durban, South Africa. The African Union inherited from a previous organization, which was called the Organization of African Unity. The Organization of African Unity had been founded in 1963 in Addis Ababa, and some of the great giants of the African world, people like Kwame Nkrumah, Haile Selassie, Gamal Nasser, were the founders of that organization, and it had two purposes. The first purpose was to rid the continent of Africa of all colonial and settler forces that had subjugated and oppressed the people. The second one was to bring about the union of the African states into one nation. The Organization of African Unity resolved the first issue, cleared the land of settlers and colonialists, but it did not adequately deal with the second objective, which was to bring into existence the United States of Africa, or some version of a unified federal government. So in 1999, uh, Colonel Gaddafi, the leader of Libya, declared that it was now necessary for the African states to form a more perfect union, for them to become the United States of Africa, in which they could, if possible, create one of the most massive governments in the world. It would be the third largest nation in the world in terms of population. In fact, it would perhaps have the largest army in the world. If you take all of the armies of the 55 states and you combine them, you would have an army as the size of the army of China. It would have a tremendous seacoast, and the fishing capabilities and productivity of this seacoast would be enormous and one of the greatest in the world. Africa would be not among the poorest nations in the world. It would be among the richest nations in the world because it contains, even at this moment, uh, some of the richest deposits of minerals anywhere found on the globe. Zimbabwe alone is perhaps the richest country on the earth in terms of its natural resources. But in addition to Zimbabwe, countries like Gabon, where you have one of the highest per capita incomes because of the oil, the productive power of that country would be enormous. Libya itself had proven under Gaddafi that its 2 to 3 million people were among the best fed, the best schooled, and the best housed, as well as the best cared for in medicine, one of the best on the globe. So the potentials of Africa are great. The massive country of Nigeria, with the largest city in the world today, the city of Lagos, sits there as the giant of West Africa, with more than 240 million people. It will, in the next 20 to 25 years, according to research, it will become the third largest nation in the world. That is, after China and India, you would have Nigeria because the population rate is so high. But as high as the population rate is in Nigeria, it is not the highest in the world. The highest rate of population growth in the world is actually in a country called Niger. And Niger is just north of Nigeria. It is said that the women there are having more children per woman than any other place on the globe. So Niger will also be projected to be a fast growing, the fastest growing country on the globe because of the high birth rate. And look at this. If you compare the fact that the average age in Europe is 49 and the average age of the African is 19, you can see that the growth of the African continent will be dynamic in the next few years. I raise this with you because I want to let you know that the African Union, in its development, has the possibility of bringing all of this into being. I was fortunate to be a member of the Senegalese delegation at the courtesy of President Abdoulaye Wade and his foreign minister, Tidiane Gadio. Maybe 2004, 2005, we went to Abuja where I was asked to give one of the presentations to the subcommittee of the presidents of the heads of state subcommittee of the African Union that was chaired by President Obasanjo of Nigeria. And it was a very revealing experience for me because what occurred was the fact that these 5 or 6 heads of state listened to me and 4 or 5 other academics talk about the need for the United States of Africa, and they basically kicked the ball down the road. In fact, a couple of them said that they couldn't see their country being a part of the United States of Africa. Ethiopia was one, and this was under when Meles Zenawi was running that country. And my good friend Thabo Mbeki also felt like South Africa had just got its independence, and this was not a possibility at the time. So there were these trepidations that people had. I mean, uh, the leader of Ethiopia thought that, well, because it was a historically important nation, as Ethiopia, it should remain a single country. So these debates and discussions went on for a couple of days. And in the end, they decided, this was 2004, they decided in 2017, that that would be the year to bring into existence this idea of a united Africa. But of course, all of those people, this is 2020, all those people are out of office now, the ones that met with me in 2004. So what's the upshot of this? The upshot is that I raised the question of the effectiveness of the African Union. I am not so sure that even in its present design, that the African Union will ever deliver to the African people the vision that Kwame Nkrumah had of a United States of Africa. I'm not so sure that Gaddafi's vision of Africa coming together as a very powerful nation, united in its foreign policy, united in its discussions and debates of war and peace, united in the use of its resources, and having one African policy developed and argued and debated by the African Parliament in one of the languages official in the state of Africa would ever happen, because the same objections that people gave to Nkrumah, they gave to Gaddafi. That you Nkrumah, you want to be the president of all Africa. You Gaddafi, you want to be the president of all Africa. And I think they missed the point, because I don't think either of those gentlemen uh, would have turned down being president of Africa, but that was not their goal. And in fact, no person lives forever. And so they didn't look at it in that way. They looked at it as a possibility for the future of the African continent. And we could have in Africa, just as we could have anywhere else, a strong, united country where people who live in one part of the continent, if you lived in Casablanca, you could have business in Casablanca and business in Cape Town. You could live in Nairobi and also have work and business in Lagos. This was the possibility. This was a vision of Gaddafi. It was a vision of Kwame Nkrumah. It is a vision of all legitimate African nationalists and Pan-Africanists. And you can't claim Pan-Africanism if you don't have an Afrocentric sense. And that's why I have always taught and talked about the Afrocentric Pan-Africanist vision. My new book, which is on this subject, which is called An Afrocentric Pan-Africanist Vision, out of Lexington Books. That book deals specifically with this. And I regret to say that during the last few years, the only president that ever really voiced any powerful interest in this project that I could see was President Wade of Senegal, who had declared that if we could bring into existence the United States of Africa, he would gladly serve as the governor of Senegal. That was a profound statement, but no other leader has ever done that. And part of that is because they are trapped in this 1648 notion of sovereignty that was actually developed by the Europeans at the Treaty of Westphalia, where they basically developed it in response to the 30 Years' War. But Africa has always been a continent where you have had kingdoms, you have had empires, and people, the notion of borders that were sacred and sacrosanct did not exist in that sense. I mean, they existed, but they were fluid. People moved from one place to the next. And there were, at local levels, conquests here and there. But the idea of this notion that you've got to protect some sovereignty, particularly a sovereignty that was created by the Europeans for Africa in 1884 and 85 at the Berlin Conference, really is one of the issues that has to be overcome. We've got to deal with this issue. So I raised this question about the African Union. I raised two more questions, and then I'll be finished with my little discussion here. The role of the Europeans in the African Union. Part of Africa's problem and our problem has often been that we don't necessarily pay for our own organizations. There's no reason for 30% of the budget of the African Union to come from Europe, particularly when you have, as I said earlier, powerhouse countries like Nigeria with its 240 million people, Ethiopia with its more than 120 million, Egypt with 100 million people. These are big countries, powerful countries with great potential and power. They could pay their dues to the African Union, But this notion of Europe paying for the African Union or giving money to the African Union for it to run its programs and activities is actually um, a bad shackles around the necks of the people of the African continent, and we have to get rid of those shackles. The second big issue is the issue regarding the Arab population with one foot in the Arab League and the other foot in the African Union. Almost no other nations anywhere in the world have these dualities. And the problem with this is that if you are in the African continent, it would seem to me that your allegiance would be to Africa. But they have not just only these northern African nations, for the most part, don't have just an allegiance to Africa. They have sometimes a stronger allegiance, it seems, to what they consider to be the Arab League. And for that reason, there are problems with the concept of African Union or the unity of Africa. How can this be? What can happen that will bring into existence a African Union or a federal government of Africa where you do not have debates and factions over religion? And I think that religion often enters, not just because the people in the North, many of them see themselves as Arabs, but because of Islamic religion or Christian religion, and the African people becoming arenas of debate and argument and fighting between factions when neither of these factions are African factions. They are both foreign invasions, and they're both foreign factors and factions, and people are fighting over them rather than asserting, as I have often called for, a clearly strong Africanist vision. What is in the best interest of Africa ought to be the global interest. And the global interest is the African interest. And if you are in Africa and you have Africa's interest at heart, then the agency of Africa must exist before and above all religion, all cultures, all ethnicity. It must be Africa, one for all and all for one. If we can create that, bring that into existence, then you would have an ideological position which is based on an Afrocentric understanding where what is in Africa's vision and Africa's dream is a thing, the reality that we teach our children, that our children work for, that we work toward. But you can't do that if you are confused. If you have confusion that comes from anywhere else, that confusion will not allow you to see your your brother in Africa or your sister in Africa as a brother and as a sister. That's the fundamental problem. I hate to always compare with the European experience, but the European project is a project that really moves on and has moved on since the 15th century, regardless to what religion people occupied, because their project was clear. It was one of domination. It was one of exploitation. It was one of conquest of other people. And everybody agreed to it, whether you were Catholic or Irish, or whether you practiced some of the old traditional Nordic Viking religions of Wotan and the Ragnarok. It didn't matter. You just simply said, this is the idea. I'm European, and this is the way I move. We don't yet have that in Africa. And we don't have it not because people come from different ethnic groups. People have always come from different ethnic groups in different places of the world. I mean, there are many ethnic groups in India, but you have one India. There are many ethnic groups in uh, the Russian Federation, but you have one country, Russia. Can be true with Africa itself. And already we're moving in that direction, but slowly, too slowly for me. Africa, for example, we have official designations for the money. Once we get our money, the Afro, we have a situation where now you can travel more freely in most of the countries without a visa. It should have been that way anyway. The freedom of the African people to move around the continent is a universal right of Africa, and it always should have been expressed in that sense. So the African Union has many problems, but we also do not yet have an African nation that has taken uh, the Union by its horns to lead the African nations, like in the past when we had Ghana with Nkrumah, or Egypt under Nasser, or even Libya under Gaddafi. We don't have that fire. Mugabe was the last real leader of Africa who had a sense of African nationalism. Most African leaders tend to be very much not just local, but very much ethnic in their orientation. They have no understanding or appreciation sometimes for the broader world and the broader task of bringing Africans together so that the energy, the spirituality, the dynamic artistic power, the uh, the tremendous genius of Africa could be employed toward an Afro future that would certainly be the Renaissance that Sheikh Anta Diop had talked about when he raised that question in 1948. When shall we be able to speak of the African Renaissance? But I think we can speak of it, but we have to bring it into existence. We have spoken of it. And that's why I say in the book, The History of Africa, uh, the quest for eternal harmony. Uh, I said that in the third edition, that this was the plan, this was the dream of all African visionaries for a United States of Africa. We have the structure, we have been given the charge, and the great African intellectuals and philosophers, Chukuneni, Chinwezu, Mafeje, um, Ake, all these, we have hundreds of these intellectuals who have spoken about this. I am, I'm, I'm late on this. I stand on their shoulders. I know what Seth Lewan Cato of South Africa meant when he wrote Africa-Centered History. I understand their strong devotion to not just the political reality, but the spiritual reality that would be unleashed if African people and their leaders could ever turn toward an interest in the United States of Africa, or whatever you call it, but a united Africa. The many meetings I've attended have shown me, though, that this can only happen if there is a popular uprising among the masses of African people. The more than 1 billion people who live on the continent of Africa, and the more than 3 to 400 million who live outside of Africa, in Brazil, in Colombia, in the United States, in Mexico, in Peru, in Ecuador, in Venezuela, in Puerto Rico, in Costa Rica, in Jamaica, in Trinidad, in Haiti, in the Bahamas, everywhere, all these African people would rejoice And so would the great spirit of Ra rejoice when Africa itself sees its way toward being united. But it can only happen if the young people, the masses of young people, demand that from the leadership. That if a person is going to be head of state, then she or he must embrace the idea of one Africa. One Africa now, one Africa forever, one Africa hotel, and peace to all of you. Thank you very much for listening.